Okay, you guys, this video is an answer key for your test. This is the adding and subtracting rational numbers part. So I want you to watch this, correct the ones that you miss, and then I'm going to give you some extra practice to do before you take your retest. So number one, 7.3 plus a negative 3.6. Remember, we think about this like money. So if you have 7.3 but you owe 3.6, these two have different signs. And anytime the two numbers have different signs, you're always going to use subtraction to figure out how much you either have or owe. In this case, because 7.3 is bigger than 3.6, when we subtract these, we're going to end up having money. Okay, we're going to end up being positive. So now over here, when I do 7.3 subtract 3.6, I've got to line up my decimals. This would be a 6, this would be 13, so that would be 7. So this would end up being 3.7 positive. Okay, number two. Remember, we always change subtraction to addition. So 4.2 subtract a negative 2.6 becomes 4.2 plus a positive 2.6. And now these are both positive. If you have and you have, when you combine those, you're going to have, your answer is going to be positive. So 4.2, 2.6, we line up our decimals, we add those two together, and we get 6.8. Okay, the next one, we have a negative 5.4 subtract 2.3. Remember, we always change subtraction to addition by doing same, change, change. So this becomes 5.4 plus a negative 2.3. So now both of these are negative. If you owe and you owe, when you combine those, you're going to owe a bigger amount. And to figure out what that amount is, you have to add those two numbers together. So that would be 7.7. So a negative 7.7 would be your answer. Okay, on number four, negative 15.30. So this is O. Negative 12.45. This is O. So when we combine these, we're going to end up owing, right? If you're in debt and then you're more in debt, you're in a bigger amount of debt. And to figure out how much debt that is, you take the two numbers and you add them together. So we line up the decimals. The decimal comes straight down. So 27.75 negative would be your answer. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the fraction ones now. Remember, when you add or subtract fractions, your fractions have to have a common denominator. Okay, so on number 5, you have a negative 5/6 and a negative 2/3. So in both cases, this would be like owing and owing. So our answer is going to be negative. The way that we figure out our answer is we take the 5/6, we take the 2/3, we add them together. Before we can add them together, we need a common denominator, which in this case would be 6. To get from 6 to 6, we had to times by 1, so this stays a 5. Okay, so this just stays 5/6. To get from 3 to 6, we had to times by 2, so the top also gets times by 2, and that gives us a 4. 5/6 plus 4/6 is 9/6. Now this fraction can simplify. 3 goes into 9 3 times, 3 goes into 6 twice, so we would end up getting a negative 3/2. Okay, the next one, negative 4 1/2 subtract a negative 6 2/5. Because this is a subtraction problem, we are going to first change it to addition. So negative 4 1/2 subtract a negative 6 2/5 becomes negative 4 1/2 plus a positive 6 2/5. Now, the easiest thing to do when you're adding and subtracting mixed numbers, when you're dealing with negative numbers, is to change both of these to an improper fraction. So 2 times 4 is 8 plus 1. This becomes 9/2. And then remember, this is negative. And then 5 times 6 is 30 plus 2 is 32/5. And remember, this one is positive. Now we find a common denominator, which in this case would be 10. We times this one by 5, This one also gets times by 5, so this becomes a negative 45. This one we times by 2, this one we also times by 2, so that becomes a 64. Now, negative 45 plus 64. If you owe $45 but you have 64, you're going to end up having a positive answer, and we just have to find the difference between 64 and 45. You can't take 5 from 4. You have to borrow from the 6, make it a 5. 14 minus 5 is 9. 5 minus 4 is 1. So that ends up being 19 tenths. And if you want to change that to a mixed number, it would be 1 and 9 tenths. This one would have been negative 1 and 1/2. Okay, number 7. Again, we have a subtraction problem, so we're going to keep, change, change. Common denominator in this case would be 8. To get from 4 to 8, we had to multiply by 2. If we multiply this by 2, now we have a negative 2. Plus, to get from 8 to 8, we had to multiply by 1. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Once our denominator is the same, we just add the top. Negative 2 plus negative 3 is negative 5/8. Number 8, negative 7/2 plus 3 2/3. So this is owing. This is having. Anytime our two numbers are different signs, we're going to subtract the two numbers. In this case, our having amount is bigger than our owing amount, so we are going to end up having. Okay, so our answer is going to end up being positive. Now, change the mixed numbers to improper fractions. 3 times 3 is 9 plus 2 is 11/3. So now we have a negative 7/2 plus 11/3. We find a common denominator, which would be 6. We had to times this by 3 to get to 6, so this also gets times by 3, so that's negative 21. We have to times this by 2 and this by 2, so that's 22. So a negative 21 plus 22 would be a positive 1/6. And then the last one, 2.6 minus 1 1/2. So 1 1/2 as a decimal is 1.5. So you've either got to change them both to decimals or both to fractions. I think in this case, it's easier to just change them both to decimals. So 2.6 subtract 1.5 becomes 2.6 plus a negative 1.5, and now you really are just subtracting these two numbers. 1.1. Okay, so now at this point, come back, grab your extra practice so that you can get ready for your retest.